Excelsior, true believers. This morning we got news from Kevin Feige himself that Deadpool and the Marvel Cinematic Universe would finally start colliding in the form of Deadpool 3, which would also be rated R. Obviously, this has us incredibly excited. So what does this mean, Max? Obviously, this is going to be kind of a long ways off, but I think it'll turn into something amazing once we get down there. What's going on?
Yeah, so they said that Deadpool 3, the script is currently in the works. It's definitely a long ways off. We have an idea of what's kind of coming down the pipe with the MCU. But I think the big question on a lot of people's minds is, first of all, how do you introduce Deadpool into the MCU? How does he kind of fit in there? And then second of all, how do you introduce an R-rated MCU movie? Because so far it's been a whole bunch of intertwined PG-13 movies that are, admittedly pretty family-friendly because this is, after all, a Disney property. Deadpool, on the other hand, is not shy about F-bombs or dismemberment. So that's kind of going to be an interesting fit. For starters, how do you fit Deadpool into the MCU? I would argue that Deadpool is the easiest character just from any universe to be able to plop into any universe as it is. He's the only person outside of the MCU to mention Thanos in a movie.
It's too far going.
Zip it, Thanos. We have a deal, and you fuck.
Like, he's the only superhero who knows that he's in a superhero movie. Like, Deadpool 2, spoilers, ended with him using a time-traveling watch to go back in time and kill the other iteration of Deadpool from X-Men Origins Wolverine, and then shoot Ryan Reynolds in the head before he could play Green Lantern, which is a character from a different comic book company. For him to pop up in the MCU with limited explanation really isn't that big of a stretch, and I think that that's, pretty doable, and if anything, they could probably lean into it.
Yeah, he's, incredibly fourth wall breaking, and that's what we love about him. We've also seen him dabble with the canonical X-Men multiple times in a very jokey, literally closed door fashion. And so I think that fits perfectly in terms of making something that's like kind of mandatory viewing that's part of the MCU overarching story, the constant setups. Having it be R-rated, I think that's the riskiest move there. But one thing we did want to talk about is the sort of multiverse approach. That's a very easy way to introduce Deadpool multiple times, including with the upcoming Spider-Man movie.
In addition to the Spider-Man movie, there's also, we know that there's probably going to be Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire showing up there. And there's also Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So, clearly Marvel is definitely headed in that weird kind of exploded dimensions direction, which allows for a lot of creative writing. You can get kind of weird with that. People are speculating about maybe WandaVision leading into House of M. And, the big question on a lot of people's minds is, how do you introduce mutants and the X-Men into the MCU? Because obviously mutants are kind of an established thing. They have to sort of exist to be, an oppressed class. Like it's you can't just kind of drop them out of nowhere unless you rip a hole in the dimensions of, fabric of space and time. Deadpool, on the other hand, you can kind of do whatever the hell you want with him. As far as having a sort of mainline entry in the MCU with Deadpool that's R-rated without having that be sort of like an age-gated, separate entity, I could completely see them doing an R-rated Deadpool movie that is set in the MCU but isn't like required viewing. It's not like you're gonna miss some major plot beat about like where the latest Infinity Stone is, or whatever it is, like the stuff that is always being set up with every installment of the sort of mainline MCU. I could see them just doing kind of a one-shot adventure that stars Deadpool and makes plenty of references to stuff that is in the MCU, and it does canonically exist against the backdrop of the MCU, which, the first Deadpool movie, it had Bob from Hydra, it had a helicarrier, but those weren't, the official MCU variations. They were just kind of like, kind of borrowing things that, Deadpool would interact with in the Marvel universe. So there's kind of a precedent there. Meanwhile, if you look at the pages of Marvel Comics, they're constantly doing, multi-series, entire universe-wide crossover events, which, if you're trying to write or trying to follow one comic series, it can be kind of tedious and frustrating because, you're reading your favorite issue and you're finding out what your character's doing. And then all of a sudden there's this big, House of M or Civil War 2. With Cable and Deadpool, House of M was this big, universe-wide, complete overturning of the table and tossing everything out the window. And they handled that by having it in the middle of a story arc where Deadpool was hopping through different dimensions and time traveling anyway. So House of M being this kind of weird detour was it just managed to be sort of like, okay, Deadpool is currently dealing with the same thing that everyone else in this universe is dealing with. And it's weird, but no weirder than the stuff that Deadpool's dealing with automatically. The second you start introducing multiverses and different timelines, you get a lot of wiggle room to get weird with it. And we've got a character who's not afraid to break the fourth wall and, make fun of lazy writing, which he does several points throughout Deadpool 2. You've got a lot of freedom there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, you could circumvent this entire issue by just making a PG-13 Deadpool movie. But to paraphrase something someone would say in an actual Deadpool movie, that bull.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want that. We want an R-rated Deadpool movie, and so I'm glad that they're finding ways to work around this. Now, one interesting twist is that Disney has been experimenting with Star, which is this sort of like Disney Plus tier with adult content. By adult content, I mean like Disney Fox adult content, not wherever your brain just went, or mine. And it's going to have a PIN code to get in. They're trying this out in foreign markets right now, which is obviously going to come with a price hike because it's Disney taking all of their Fox-owned properties, you know, like their diehards, stuff like Logan, and putting them under one umbrella with the Disney Plus thing there. So in order to populate that with new content, they're going to have to make some new movies. And this is the perfect fit for something like that.
No, totally. And obviously, Deadpool isn't the only kind of R-rated Marvel character. Like, eventually, you know, the MCU is going to probably have to incorporate the Punisher, and that's a tricky one because he's a guy who shoots people. And then there's, of course, Blade. We're getting a Blade movie. I'm really curious to see how they handle that in the PG-13 context when this is a character who fundamentally has to stab people with stakes and who drinks blood. Like, it's pretty. I mean, you could do PG-13 vampires, but you kind of have to nerf it a little bit. And again, these are characters you can't really just like make fun of them. Whereas with Deadpool, you can. Now, you mentioned that Deadpool would say "F that" to a PG-13 Deadpool movie. However, we did get one. A lot of people forget this, but Fox re-released Deadpool 2 as a PG-13 recut with Once Upon a Deadpool, which involved an entirely like weird reframing where they made it like The Princess Bride and they had Deadpool reading adult Fred Savage a bedtime story. I could absolutely see them doing something similar like this, where there's Deadpool 3, the grown-up version. You got to watch it on Disney Star or whatever, or in R-rated movie theaters. And then there's the PG-13 version, which is so all the kids and their families can watch to find out what's happening with their favorite spandexed heroes throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And again, like, you know, the MCU used to be the cinematic universe, and now we are heading into territory where it's also in TV form. Like, we're getting streaming content. And then, of course, there's What If, which is going to be, you know, showing us things that didn't happen, but they also are sort of in the cinematic. So, like, I would say the Marvel Cinematic Universe has kind of exploded at this point. Like, it's definitely existing on a lot of different levels. And I would say Deadpool is going to be right at home in a situation like that, R-rated or not. I'm just really happy to hear that, like, Disney isn't shying away from letting this character be, you know, foul-mouthed and disgusting, which he should be.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, no matter how you spin it, no matter where it fits, Disney is making an R-rated Deadpool 3. And that's really the best news we could possibly ask for. How much it connects to everything else, sort of secondary for me, you know, but I want another Deadpool, and I want him uncensored. I want him to be able to do whatever he wants to do with his weird naked legs and sometimes other body parts that he's you know, there's a lot there. So
there's a lot there. No, definitely. I mean, and you know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is what, like 11 years old at this point, and you know, Fox got bought by Disney over 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. So the folks at Marvel have had plenty of time to sort of start thinking about this, and plenty of time to figure it out by the time Deadpool 3 finally does come out. It's still a ways off. We don't know what's going to happen between now and then. But the good news is they've got thousands and thousands of comic books that they could borrow ideas from. And again, it's all made up, so who cares? That's true. It's fake. As long as it's fun, it's what matters.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you want from Deadpool 3, how you think it should fit in with the MCU, if you even think it should really have to do that at all, and if you'll pay for an extra tier of adult-rated themed streaming content on Disney Plus to go with your Lion Kings and Jungle Books. So for all things Deadpool and comic books and video games and MCU and everything else, you're already in the right place. IGN.
Enough said.
Shake, shake, booby. It looks good, kill you, would be.